So this video showed up in my recommended list, and I was actually curious what a lawyer thought about this scene from a legal stance. And after I watched about half of it, I just could not stop myself from making a response video. So grab yourself a drink and get comfortable, because here we go.
How about a smile for me, huh?
A smile?
Yeah. I'm offering to help you. Least you could do is give me a smile.
Crucially, he makes contact with the map that Captain Marvel is holding, pulls it down, and says something that might be interpreted as a threat. How about a smile for me?
How could this be interpreted as a threat? It's not even clear that it's a threat. What is he threatening? It comes across to me as flirting. Even if he does come across as douchey and rude about it, how can you argue that it's in a threatening manner? He asks for a smile and offers a ride. Being douchey is not a crime. I mean, from what I can tell, he wants her to like him, and generally you don't threaten people that you want to like you.
This guy is not a particularly nice guy, and crucially here, he has invaded Captain Marvel's space. Hey Legal Eagles, it's time to think like a lawyer. And I really mean that this time because there are a lot of people engaging in quasi-legal analysis and really messing it up. Would you believe that the men who are complaining about Captain Marvel again?
There are women complaining too. Where have you been seeing these complaints? YouTube? Because YouTube's a majority male audience and creators, so naturally you're probably going to see more complaints from men here.
Are wrong about the law. I know it's crazy, but stick with me here. By the way, since we're dealing with a Marvel property, as always, there will be a post-credit scene at the end of this video. So a little background about Captain Marvel before we dive into the current ridiculous controversy that is surrounding this franchise. Captain Marvel came out last summer. It had slightly more controversy than normal because, as far as I can tell, and I wasn't following this closely.
How do you know the controversy is ridiculous if you haven't been following it closely?
The lead superhero is a woman, and the lead actress, Brie Larson, said some semi-controversial things about racism and sexism in Hollywood.
I don't understand why you're emphasizing that the lead superhero is a woman. Like, how is that relevant to what Brie Larson said? You could have just said that the lead actress for Captain Marvel, Brie Larson, said some controversial words that could be taken as racist and or sexist. If I didn't know any better, I would say that you're leading up to saying that the men that are complaining are mad only because she's a female superhero, or at least that's one of their main reasons. Have you ever heard of Wonder Woman? No one had a problem with Gal Gadot because she didn't go around saying she didn't care what white men think of her movie.
I do not need a 40-year-old white dude to tell me what didn't work for him about A Wrinkle in Time. I don't hate white dudes. I'm just saying we need to be conscious of our bias and do our part to make sure that everyone is in the room.
That led some people, predominantly men, to boycott the film, which appears to have had no real effect because the movie did fine when it came out last summer.
Okay, I have two things to say here. Just because a movie makes money doesn't mean the movie could not have made more money. If Brie Larson's comments stopped even just one person from going to see her movie, that's more money the film could have made if she just kept her mouth shut. 2, Marvel Studios made it seem like you had to go see Captain Marvel to understand what was going to happen in Avengers Endgame, which was probably the most anticipated movie of the decade, if not all time. No one said Captain Marvel wasn't going to make money. Even the people boycotting the film knew that it was going to make money. If you'd done your research, you would know this.
Fast forward to last week when the producers of the movie released a deleted scene where Captain Marvel more or less beats up a guy on a motorcycle.
More or less beats up a guy on a motorcycle. That overly simplifies what she did. And I can tell from the beginning clip that you're probably going to go through the lead up to this in great detail, and I really hope that you do the same thing with her retaliation.
Take it!
What, no smile?
This led to a reaction on certain parts of the internet. Some called Captain Marvel a villain.
I just see a villain. I see Captain Marvel written as a villain here.
The scene's awful, portrays Carol as a villain, that's why they cut it.
Carol Danvers is supposed to be the charismatic, endearing, and likable heroine of the film, but she behaves here like you'd expect a villain to behave. Apparently, feminists believe that women encounter guys like this all the time, and it's such a hardship.
Yeah, I have to agree with this. This is something I could definitely see a villain doing, or at the very least an anti-hero. But Captain Marvel is supposed to be a hero, or at least that's what everyone in the film says she is. She even says it herself. There's a reason they cut this from the film. Also, they didn't say she's a villain. They said the scene makes her seem like a villain.
And even conservative commentator Ben Shapiro gave this theory a signal boost.
Does she actually think that alienating people like me is going to be big box office? Of course not. She knows that. She's not completely dumb.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
The argument, as far as I can tell, is as follows. The deleted scene shows that a man on a motorcycle is rude to Captain Marvel. In a totally unprovoked attack,
I wouldn't say totally unprovoked. I would say completely unjustified. In fact, you haven't shown anyone say that it's totally unprovoked. You're putting words in their mouth and arguing a point that no one has made. This is such a straw man argument, and as a lawyer, you should know better.
Captain Marvel effectively beats the hell out of the guy and steals his motorcycle. Instead of using her words, Captain Marvel engages in violence and is therefore the villain. The problem with this argument is that it is legally and morally incorrect.
Morally incorrect. Are you saying what she did is morally good, morally correct? Or are you saying that them defining her as a villain in this scenario is morally incorrect? Because either way you're defining it, you are wrong. Because the actions in which she partakes in this scene is something a villain would do. Morally, a villain would do. You could argue that she's not a villain, but what she does here is not morally right. Just because someone annoys you, harasses you, touches your shit, does not mean you get to threaten their life and take their shit. It's not acceptable. It's not okay. And either way you spin it, you are wrong here.
I don't begrudge these commentators too much. It's a clever attempt at being contrarian.
This is not contrarian. There's a lot of people who don't like this scene. Just look at the like-dislike ratio for the deleted scene. Look at the top comments. A lot of people are not happy with this and how it makes her look.
It's just that the evidence doesn't really support this argument, and the attempts to shoehorn this movie, and in particular this deleted scene, into a particular conservative narrative.
If it's a particular conservative narrative, can you please share it with me? Because I'm pretty sure some of the people you have shown here are not conservatives. Like, I don't know the particulars of all of their political leanings, but I don't see how what they said is a conservative idea.
Just doesn't really work. Now, I'll note on the side that I'm not in a habit of commenting on this kind of popular minutia, but it just so happens that I was in the process of writing a practice exam for law students, a law school hypothetical, that involved a very similar fact pattern to what is portrayed in the deleted scenes.
Really? You want to share that scenario with us? I mean, I can understand if Captain Marvel was a regular woman, maybe you could argue this in her favor, but she's not. She's extremely powerful, and as a lawyer, you should know that the context like this matters.
And as a second aside, I'm going to go through this clip in what some might consider excruciating detail, because that's what you do in law school. Legal analysis is mostly factual analysis. And so, since this particular fact pattern was so close to what I was already working on, I thought it would be a great opportunity to talk about some of the legal analysis that law students and lawyers go through on an everyday basis. But let's examine the clip. All right, clearly a Los Angeles strip mall. I would recognize that architecture or lack thereof anywhere.
Nice scuba suit. You need a ride, darling?
Okay, so clearly here, Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, is reading a map or a newspaper. She's minding her own business, and some guy on a motorcycle has parked his motorcycle at the strip mall, and he has made an unwanted overture.
So I can pretty much agree with this observation. It's pretty clear to me that she's not interested. She flips the map down when he addresses her. She takes one look at him, ignores him, even flips the map back up. Clearly not interested.
Not the most polite thing to do, but not illegal either. And of course, I guess I have to point out that Captain Marvel is fully within her rights to completely ignore this gentleman and not engage with him in any way, shape, or form. That is also perfectly legal.
How about a smile for me, huh?
A smile?
Yeah. I'm offering to help you. Least you could do is give me a smile.
Okay, this is the crucial act that takes place that really changes the narrative entirely. The man on the motorcycle has parked his motorcycle. He's taken his helmet off. He stood up, he walked over to Captain Marvel, he put his hand on the map that she was holding and is clearly right next to her. You can see that his arm is sort of angled, which means that the distance between Captain Marvel and himself must be just a matter of inches, because it's not like he was reaching out with his hand in an extended fashion. He's reaching out his hand in a way that makes it seem like the map is directly in front of him.
I have to disagree. You're not taking into account that he's much taller than her. It looks like her head reaches his shoulder. I mean, it's hard to tell from the angle of the camera, but later when she puts down the map and shakes his hand, it shows he's actually a couple steps away from her. He never takes a step back when he initially approaches her, so based on this observation, he's probably a couple steps away from her and at least a step away from her map. You're making it seem like he's looming over her in an intimidating way, but he's probably what most people would consider a reasonable distance away.
And crucially, he makes contact with the map that Captain Marvel is holding, pulls it down, and says something that might be interpreted as a threat. How about a smile for me?
So I already covered this in the beginning, but if you're going to claim this as a threat, you need to define the legal definition of a threat. Like, what's the threat here? And I understand gestures can be considered threatening, but they usually have to be accompanied by threatening language. And for this to be legally considered a threat, it needs to be clear that the threat or danger is credible, real, and imminent. No reasonable person is going to consider the line, "How about a smile for me? I'm offering you a ride," as threatening language, and therefore his gesture can't be taken as a threat. Not to mention, she doesn't even see him as a threat. She has superpowers, and as far as we know, no weakness. Even her body language shows that he's no threat in her mind. Context matters.
This guy is not a particularly nice guy, and crucially here, he has invaded Captain Marvel's space. This is a crucial distinction that we'll talk about in just a second, because in my opinion, I think that that meets the statutory definition of assault and battery.
What? Assault and battery? Really? We're just gonna blow right past harassment and straight to assault and battery. Okay, I hope you have a good justification for this.
I'm offering to help you. Least you could do is give me a smile.
So his hand has left the map. He is still standing very close to her, but it appears that his arms are at his side, and Captain Marvel has taken the map, put it to the side, and she's about to confront this man.
How about a handshake? I'm Veers.
People call me the Don.
Wow.
All right, so they both engage in what could be considered a consensual handshake.
How is this not consensual? She offers and he takes. This is the fucking definition of consensual. If anything, she turns the handshake into a non-consensual handholding. He wants to let go and she won't let him.
At which point Captain Marvel then begins to squeeze and, I guess, electrocute this guy. I actually didn't see the movie, so I don't know exactly what her powers are.
You didn't even see the movie? Talk about not doing your fucking research. The context of her powers and her strength is really fucking important to your argument. Do ya fucking research.
But he's clearly in pain as a result of this grip that Captain Marvel has put on in this handshake.
Here's a proposition for you. You're gonna give me your jacket, your helmet, and your motorcycle, and in return, I'm gonna let you keep your hand.
Take it.
What, no smile?
Okay, so why do I think that this may qualify as assault and battery?
Are you fucking serious? You're not even gonna address what she does here? You know, the extortion, the torture, the robbery? For fuck's sake, man.
Well, battery is a criminal offense involving the unlawful physical contact or touching of another person, which is either considered harmful or offensive.
How was him touching her map considered harmful or offensive? I've already debunked the idea that this gesture can be taken as a threat, so you have no argument here for battery.
And battery is distinct from the separate crime of assault, which is the act of creating the apprehension of contact or unlawful touching.
You have yet to define the legal definition of a threat, and my guess is you're not going to define it because it completely disproves your point, so try again.
There are two flavors of battery in most jurisdictions. There's the crime of battery, which is prosecuted by the state, and then there's also the tort of battery, which is what you would accuse someone of if you wanted to sue them for civil damages in a lawsuit. But most of this discussion should apply to both. By way of example, California Penal Code section 242 defines battery as any willful and unlawful use of force or violence upon the person of another.
So essentially what she does to him. Thanks for that, man. Now I can add battery to the list.
To meet this criteria, the prosecutor has to be able to prove that the defendant intentionally and unlawfully touched another person in a harmful or offensive manner, and the second element, which is that the defendant did not act in self-defense or in the defense of someone else.
Ooh, how about the criteria for a threat? You know, since it's crucial to your argument here.
As any law student will tell you, even the slightest touch can be enough to satisfy the battery statute if it's done without consent or in a harmful or offensive way. In fact, you learn very early on in law school about the so-called eggshell skull theory, which is that if you make contact with someone who has a skull that is as thin as an eggshell, you're liable for those damages, even if the kind of touching that you do would not even hurt another person.
And here's where doing your fucking research comes in handy. If you watch the movie, you'd know that he could not possibly harm her. Therefore, this shit doesn't even apply. If anything, it applies in the reverse, because she could kill him with minimal effort, probably with just a flick of her wrist.
But if it's enough to hurt someone with a very unusual condition, what we call the eggshell skull, I don't actually know if that is an actual medical condition or not, that's enough to make you on the hook for the damages that you cause as a result of your unconsented to touching, or battery in this case. And almost as important is that the contact requirement with another person is satisfied even if it's just touching their clothing, or if you touch something that is immediately connected to that person. So if you punched someone and you punch them through their shirt, now technically you haven't made contact with that person, but because the shirt is so connected to the person, punching them through a garment of some kind is enough to satisfy the touching of a person requirement. And crucially, that extends to things that are immediately connected outside of the clothing as well. So for example, if someone was walking down the street and they were holding a cell phone in their hand, if you went up to that person and smacked the cell phone right out of their hand, well, even if you don't actually make contact with the person's hand or their forearm, the fact that they were holding the cell phone and it fell out of their hand, that's enough to qualify as battery for the person.
Okay, both of these examples, the punching the shirt and slapping the phone out of somebody's hand, are clearly harmful or threatening, but this is not clearly threatening. You see what's missing here? The clarity and the reasonableness of your claim.
And if the victim saw you coming and was in apprehension of that contact, then you'd also be guilty of the crime and tort of assault as well. That's the apprehension of the physical contact. So not only would that count as destruction of property, it would also qualify as potentially the crime of assault and battery. We see that in the clip, the man on the motorcycle invades Captain Marvel's physical space. There was no reason for him to stand up from his motorcycle and walk the 10 to 15 feet away from the motorcycle into Captain Marvel's physical space.
It's a strip mall. He was probably there for something else, saw her, took a fancy to her, and decided to hit on her and talk to her. And maybe he wasn't sure she was interested. He could have been trying to make his intentions clear. You know, he was hitting on her. It's not completely unreasonable. And if she was an adult, she would have used her words and said, "I'm not interested." Instead, she decides to introduce herself and offer a handshake, clearly showing that she doesn't take him as a threat. This action alone completely goes against your argument that what he does can be taken as harmful or offensive.
There was no reason for him to place his hands on the map or the newspaper that Captain Marvel had in her hands. Now, of course, no one's going to argue that Captain Marvel was physically harmed by this interaction, but that's not a requirement to the crime of battery. All that is required is the touching of something that is immediately connected to Captain Marvel. And I think that makes the statutory definition of assault.
It doesn't. And even if it did, it in no way excuses what she does to him.
And the fact that he has invaded her personal space, that he's standing only inches away from her, saying something that could arguably constitute a threat against her.
Arguably constitutes a threat. You keep saying that, but you never actually define a criminal threat. Too bad for you, anybody can Google criminal threat and see that him approaching her and touching her map does not constitute as a threat.
I think that qualifies as assault as well. So this guy's actions, I think, constitute the harmful or offensive touching of Captain Marvel. She is effectively the victim of being battered by this guy on the motorcycle. And the thing about being a victim of effectively battery and the apprehension of battery, assault, that gives you access to the legal justification of self-defense. Arguably, she was partially justified here.
Partially justified? You fucking serious? Does self-defense mean she gets to torture him and take his shit? Where do you draw the line?
Now, those are of course the legal arguments, but even if we're going to talk about philosophy, I think morally speaking, it's the motorcycle guy who initiates force.
Oh my god, you cannot be fucking serious. Where is the force on his part? Jesus, you are desperate to make her the victim here.
And under almost any conception of morality, once someone has initiated force against you, you are privileged enough to use the defense of force against that person. So long as you don't escalate from using normal force into using deadly force.
Ho ho ho! This is where you're motherfucking wrong, and you disproved yourself in your own video. Earlier, you showed a clip from the trailer that shows her using her power to blow up a jukebox. In fact, she threatens to take his hand. That most definitely is an escalation of force.
Which it doesn't appear that Captain Marvel did here. Was Captain Marvel justified in taking this motorcycle and jacket? No, probably not.
No, the answer is no. There's no probably about it.
But Mr. motorcycle rider committed battery in the first place and deserved some of what came to him.
Oh, I'm sorry I keep pausing it, but this lawyer keeps digging a deeper and deeper hole for himself. The logic behind this is so fucked up. It blows my mind the lengths people will go to justify this.
And we can argue about how much force was justified and what kind of apprehension Captain Marvel was in and what kind of fear she faced from this guy.
None. There was no fear. Here's a piece of advice, Mr. Lawyer. Do ya fucking research.
But certainly it is not as clear-cut as Captain Marvel is the villain or the motorcycle guy was completely innocent.
No one is saying that. Stop putting words in people's mouths. It's embarrassing.
It's never black and white. The legal reality is always gray.
Oh, I can believe a morally gray person like you would believe that. And while I can agree that things are not always black and white, you sure as shit make it seem that way in this video.
My guess is that some, but not all, of the force was justified. At the end of the day, this tempest in a teapot was really about a select few people.
No, 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 no. That is not correct.
Who wanted to have a very idiosyncratic view of this deleted scene. And really, all of those mansplainers...
Mansplainers? Really? Like, why actually listen to their arguments when you can just call them mansplainers and strawman their arguments? You're really showing your bias here.
Who wanted to make a clever point about Captain Marvel being the villain ended up becoming the thing that they hate most in this world. They are wrong on the internet.
No, you are wrong on the internet.
And as an aside, everyone recognizes that this scene is basically an homage to what happens in Terminator 2, right?
Oh god, please tell me you aren't going with this.
This scene is, shot for shot, exactly what happens to Arnold Schwarzenegger in T2.
Is it? Are you sure about that? I mean, you said you hadn't seen Captain Marvel, and now I'm wondering if you've even seen Terminator 2.
I need your clothes, your boots, and your motorcycle.
Wow. Way to cut out the most important part of the scene. That's pretty disingenuous of you.
No one called Arnold Schwarzenegger a villain in the scene. Everybody knows he's the hero.
No. No, he's not the hero. He's the protagonist. And maybe by the end of the movie you could argue that he's the hero, but here, in this moment, he's no hero. In fact, at this point of the movie, we question whose side he's even on.
I mean, obviously he was the villain in Terminator 1, but he's the good guy in Terminator 2, and this scene from Captain Marvel is basically exactly the same scene over again.
Really? So you're saying this is the same as this? Okay, man.
Take it! Take it! Oh.
But I guess it's different if the superhero has a vagina.
And you went there. You want to know what else is different? The Terminator is a fucking robot. He's a machine programmed with one objective. He doesn't have morals. That's actually an important part of the movie, but you'd know that if you actually watched it. So I skimmed through the rest of the video because it seems like it was just a ad for his sponsor. So I'm just going to ignore it and say that this is the end of the video. Let me know what you thought in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video.